Well, hello and welcome back to the All Saints podcast. I'm here with my good friend, Pastor Dane Johannsson of the Church of the Triumphant King in Weatherford. It's been too long. You've been here too long before we managed to get you on the podcast, but I'm delighted to have you with us, Dane.
I'm thankful to be here. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. Well, the aim of this podcast is really for us to get to know you. It's such a blessing to have two CREC churches in close proximity, and of course we've got our church plant down in Granbury as well with Pastor Neil. So Lord willing, who knows what will happen in the next 10 years, and Fort Worth and Dallas becomes a place where people can come, and there's a multitude of churches seeking to be faithful in our denomination. But one step in that direction is getting to know each other.
Yes, sir.
And so tell us about yourself. So just give us briefly a sketch of your family. I know you're married, you've got some children.
Yeah.
And then let's talk through the shape of your ministry, where you've been, where you've come from, and what brought you to CTK, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I was not raised in a Christian home. Mm-hmm. The Lord saved me out of atheism when I was 18 years old through a kind of parachurch skateboard ministry called King of Kings Skateboard Ministry.
Really?
Yeah. So kind of like extreme sports, kind of the Louis Giglio,
Can you still
big
skateboard?
crusades. I can still skateboard probably, but yeah, it's been a while, been a few years. But yeah, kind of Louis Giglio, big crusades and stuff. They would have extreme sports ministries come alongside. So it was through that I actually was brought to a saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. Before that, I considered myself an atheist. So that was when I was 18 that the Lord saved me.
Right.
And pretty quickly, I started working with that skateboard ministry, and there was kind of a mix, a hodgepodge of the skaters on the team and the people who were involved with that ministry and their backgrounds. This was kind of around the height, kind of the climax of the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement in, 2007, 2008. And so there was a few Calvinists on that team that exposed me to Calvinism pretty early on at my Christian walk. But I served with that ministry for a couple of years, and it's right around 2010 that I really started to read theological works and take my faith more seriously in a theological direction. I was still a brand new Christian at the time, and was exposed to John Calvin and Wayne Grudem and many of those kind of authors, and then through them the Puritans. But pretty early on, I had been helping with ministry things with that skateboard ministry and leading Bible studies and doing evangelistic outreaches and preaching the gospel in those kind of settings and doing discipleship. But it was probably around 2010, 2011 that I felt the call to ministry. Mm-hmm. Before that, I had no desire for the ministry, but it was around 2010, 2011 as I was reading Charles Spurgeon's lectures to my students.
Right.
I got exposed to Charles Spurgeon through some of those guys. Yeah. And so it was both terrifying and exciting, and something that I definitely wanted to do.
Just double click on that. Tell us about that call. What form did that take? Because people will use that term in different ways.
Yes.
Sometimes it refers to an external call. A church calls you either to a post, or they urge you to set yourself aside for pastoral ministry.
Right.
But sometimes it has reference to an internal conviction or a gradually growing desire, and then sometimes our charismatic friends might use it in a different way. For you, what form did that call take?
Well, yeah, and you made the distinction there between the internal and the external call, which is usually in this discussion what is talked about. For me, it was the external call that came first. I kept having people just put me into settings where I'm leading Bible studies, I'm preaching sermons, I'm doing evangelistic stuff, but I didn't want anything to do with it. Actually, internally, I was happy to help, serve in those ways, but it wasn't something I wanted to do long term. I could never envision myself being a pastor. So it was, like I said, reading Spurgeon's lectures to my students in 2010 or 11 that, that internal aspect came where I said, wow, this is truly an amazing calling. This is something that I can't imagine not doing this and being a part of this. And so I want to do it. And
at this point, you're early 20s, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And they've got you preaching.
Yes, yeah. They shouldn't have, but they did.
Well, Spurgeon was preaching at 18 or younger even.
Yeah, I think it was 16 was his call as a pastor.
There's an extract from one of his sermons at the start of Packer's book, Knowing God, which I'm sure you've read, and it's like a page-long extract of one of Spurgeon's sermons which he preached when I think he was 19.
Yeah.
or 18, something like that. It's amazing. It's just astounding.
There's people in church history
Erudition and insight. Yeah.
There's people in church history that I feel like God just puts there to say, don't try to imitate, just enjoy.
Yeah,
and I feel like Spurgeon is definitely one of those people. You know?
Don't try this at home.
Yes.
Yeah. So what you said, I want to let you finish answering the first question I asked first, but what you said about the parachurch skateboard ministry is really interesting as well, because it highlights the potential value of parachurch ministries. I think for myself, and I know you want to say something like the same thing, we're committed to the place of the church at the center of God's purposes. But it's sometimes said that parachurch ministries can sometimes do things that the church one day in 1,000 years' time will get round to doing, but right now isn't doing well. And reaching 18-year-old atheists on skateboards may have been just one of those things.
Yes.
Right. Do you have any reflections on the place of parachurch ministries and their value and your involvement in them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially as I've grown in my understanding of the centrality of the church and Reformed theology. I've definitely taken a different view of parachurch ministries. You know, at the time, kind of early on coming into it, the general feel that I had being part of a parachurch ministry and the other people who were part of it was that this is where the real work is happening, right? This is where Jesus is actually active. You know, the pastors who are just kind of, they're lazy, they're doing their thing in the church, and, you know, it's good, we should get into church, church is important, but the real action, where Christ is actually moving, is out here in the parachurch ministries. And so I would reject that view now. I don't think that's actually true, but at the same time, we shouldn't just throw out the baby with the bathwater. Right. And like you said, God is working in and through these things, and I think there is still some great value to it.
We saw somebody teaching in your name.
Yeah.
We tried to stop him.
Right.
No, don't do that.
Yeah, right.
He's probably on your side.
Right. And you do have, you know, there can be a tendency to draw kind of rogues to parachurch ministries who don't have a place in the church or feel that they don't, or have kind of excluded themselves from the church, and they find a place in a parachurch ministry. I mean, it's
possible to imagine parachurch ministry settings where there is just less accountability.
Yes.
And they're not tied to church structures, and so that. But there are churches where there's no accountability as well.
Exactly.
You know, so you're going to have the whole spectrum of. Interesting. What kind of atheist were you?
An ignorant one. Practical.
Right.
Mostly. Yeah. But I mean, I just was not raised in the in the church and had no exposure to it and thought it was stupid. And
I was thinking more.
Only bumpkins would be a Christian.
Were you an atheist in the mold of the kind of Sam Harris, Dawkins, Dennett, quite strongly intellectual, and I don't want to impute negative motives, but there's a certain amount of pride perhaps in the internal coherence of that atheist worldview from the point of view of an atheist. Was that ever you? Were you kind of intellectually armed in that way?
Towards the end of my atheism, I started to dabble more in that, just because I had these Christian friends who were part of this parachurch skateboard ministry who were telling me all sorts of things, and so I was trying to kind of find arguments against it, but primarily it was not an intellectual atheism. It was a practical atheism of, I've never been exposed to this, I've never been taught this, and you know, the kind of home I was raised in, Christians were viewed poorly, and so
It was interesting, just for me thinking about this, your background as an atheist. I was reading Psalm 14 this morning. So the fool has said in his heart, there is no God.
Yes.
They are corrupt, they do abominable deeds. And obviously that's not a kind of analytical statement about every person who doesn't believe in God. You know, it's not intended in that way. But the thing that really struck me when I was reading it this morning was I've been thinking a good deal about the intellectual framework within which atheism operates and the intellectual framework within which Christian theism operates, and trying to make sense of how atheist, materialist worldviews work or don't work to whatever extent. And Psalm 14 confronts you immediately with the moral corollaries of atheism. The fool says in his heart there is no God. They are corrupt. And it's just an interesting approach, if you survey the history of atheism, what Psalm 14 draws your attention to much more is Stalin and the gulags, rather than the cognitive and intellectual landscape of materialist philosophies of mind and consciousness, you know. And I guess I found that quite striking and illuminating, and from an apologetic standpoint, and also from the standpoint of constantly trying to strengthen my own way of articulating a Christian worldview by setting it against alternatives, to remember the moral cost of atheism tells against it pretty strongly. And I wonder whether we could make more of that in an apologetic context. I've not really. There's no question here.
Okay.
I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, and whether it's something that you've thought through with any greater detail.
Yeah, and in Romans chapter 1, Paul obviously touches on this and draws that connection there as well. With they suppress the truth in unrighteousness, and then that litany of their evil deeds is seen there, right? It's often a cover for the wickedness that they want to be doing, the unrighteousness that they want to practice. They're fools, and they suppress the truth in unrighteousness.
Yes.
They say there is no God, and so that they might do evil, right?
Well, this gets to one of the things I really did want to talk about with you, which perhaps we'll come to in a few minutes, about the character of your ministry, but more broadly, the character of Christian ministry and Christian life. One of the central things that we have to do to contend against and in a world where God is denied and Christ's lordship is denied is to be morally unimpeachable. It has to be possible for us to say, well, no, let me turn it around the other way. It has to be impossible for somebody who's an unbeliever to point at the church and say that's where all the wickedness is, you see. And if we were ever in a place where the church could the church as a whole could hold its head up and say, like, you may not agree with us, but you can't fault our lives, can you? That would strengthen our case substantially, and that it's been possible at times in the church's history, especially in the early church, for the church to do that.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Right? Whatever the Roman authorities might have thought of the Christians, it was the Christians who went back into the cities to minister to the plague victims, and who gathered collections from all over the empire to take back to their people and others in starving cities in Judea. That kind of testimony starts to bear fruit pretty quickly. Yeah. So you received a sense of call to the ministry.
Yes,
You've been through the skateboard ministry.
Yeah.
Sketch for us the path from there to where you were immediately before CTK, and that'll scoop up your wife and kids in the process.
Because
at some point they came along, right?
Yes. And I'll just give a brief sketch of that period. So I start feeling that internal call. At that 2012, I got engaged to my wife, my now wife, and decided that I should probably, if I want to pursue this, if other people around me had also thought that I've called to this, and now I'm feeling that this is something that God would have me to do, and I couldn't imagine anything better to do with my time and with my life and give myself to, then I need some sort of theological education. So I started attending Moody Bible Institute online. So it was in Chicago, so I was just doing it online. And around that same time, my fiance and I started attending a Reformed church in Mesa, Arizona, called Church of the Redeemer. Gary Johannsson is the pastor there, and he was the one who ended up marrying us as well, and spent my time there and trying to be discipled by him. And he's given me books to read and those kinds of things, and supporting this feeling of internal and external calling there, and coming under the leadership of the session at that church. From there, about 2014, I received a call to become a youth pastor at a Southern Baptist church in Arizona. I took that call. That's where I was ordained. So I was ordained in a Southern Baptist church in Gold Canyon, Arizona, which is right outside of Apache Junction, which is in the middle of nowhere. Right on the edge of the Phoenix metro area. Did the youth pastor thing there for a couple of years, and then some friends of mine and some people I knew who wanted a Reformed Baptist church. We ended up planting a Reformed Baptist church that subscribed to the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith. So that was our primary doctrinal standard.
And were you the pastor of that church?
Yes, yeah. Right. So I was the lead pastor there, and there was an elder with me as well, and we had 3 deacons when we began. So we did that for a few years, started in my living room, then moved into a middle school auditorium. And then from there, we actually started sharing or renting from a Presbyterian church, an OPC church, in the afternoons. And I was good friends with the pastor there, Pastor Joel Ellis. At that time, it was Reformation OPC. Now it's just Reformation Presbyterian Church, and they're on their way into the CREC as well, so that's great. But he and I were good friends, and he heard about how much we were paying for rent at the middle school, and how, you'd come home with roaches in your stuff and all of that. And he said, why don't you guys just use our...
Why don't you use our church?
Yeah. So he goes, we're done with it about noon, so you guys can have it in the afternoon.
That's great.
So we went from a morning service to an afternoon service at the OPC, and that was about 2 years into the Reformed Baptist Church that I was pastoring. We were there for a couple of years, and my convictions on paedobaptism and covenant and Presbyterian church government began to change, no doubt due to my friendship with Joel. Pastor Joel. Yeah. We also had the other elder had stepped down about a year prior to me coming into the OPC, and I told the church, listen, I'm not going to do the one-man show here where there's no elders except for me. I'm the only pastor. Let's give it a year. We're going to pray and ask God to give us another man, raise up another man, or send us another man to pastor this church alongside of me. But I'm not going to do it longer than a year. At the end of a year, we're just going to be done. And so about 9 to 10 months into that, Pastor Joel said, well, if you just finish your little deal with paedobaptism and really think this through, and if you came over to the dark side, right, of paedobaptism and Reformed theology, then you guys could just show up earlier, and you could be an associate pastor here. And so that ended up being what happened. Yeah.
So, and I want to come back and hear about your family in a bit more detail, but that's a series of church transitions, and that last one in particular is unique. I've never heard of that particular process before, where you've got a Baptist church and its pastor basically gets folded into an existing Presbyterian church because of the changing convictions of the Baptist pastor, in this case. Tell me about how that went down with the congregation. I want to hear about those details.
We had about 55 members at that time. Reformed Baptist churches are usually pretty small. Most Reformed churches are usually pretty small, except for certain exceptions like All Saints. But the Reformed Baptist churches, it used to be a joke. We could hold service in a phone booth, right, or a school bus, right. So it was about 55 members at the time, and I was very open about the process as we're walking through, and before that, I'd even said, what if we looked at a Presbyterian denomination, if there are any that will allow credo Baptistic churches to join, and we had looked at a couple, Evangel, CREC. Well, the CREC we hadn't considered in too much depth, but I actually went and visited an Evangel Presbyterian meeting, and that actually looked like it might be something we might do. So I was very open with the congregation at the time, and when the transition actually finally took place, we did lose 2 households, but it was amicable, and I helped them find another Reformed Baptist church that they could attend, or something that was somewhat like-minded. But most of the membership simply just came with me, into the OPC church at the time.
Yeah, it's really good to hear, and I'm not at all surprised, just delighted. I know you, getting to know you better all the time, and I've had the pleasure of interacting with Pastor Joel Ellis a little bit over various issues. Well, maybe come to that setting in a few minutes. But the history of our denomination involves quite a lot of either pastors or churches or members of our churches making the transition to the dark side. That's we're joking, right? But it feels like that from the perspective of the majority Baptist or Reformed Baptist church landscape in the American South and Texas, and
Yeah.
and I think it is really good to keep that in mind. And even the phrase "the dark side" is helpful in reminding us what it looks like,
Mm-hmm.
because for many people, their Baptist church may be small, but it's a thing that, when we started going to this, it's the thing that got Dad off being drunk the whole time, and we got ourselves straightened out, and the pastor loved us and prayed for us, and the old ladies watched out for my mom, and I was raised in that church, and that's why I don't touch a drop of alcohol, and he was dispensationalist, and he taught us all the rapture charts, and so we're all... It's possible to describe that in such a way that we're ridiculing it, especially if we've come to experience frustrations with it. But actually, it has been such a tremendous blessing in God's providence for many people, and it's incumbent, it seems to me, on those. If you think you've grown in your appreciation of covenant theology and Reformed theological heritage and teaching of Scripture, so you're now Reformed and Paedo Baptist, it's incumbent upon us to demonstrate that maturity in the way that we handle the break. And there's a right way and there's a bunch of wrong ways.
Yes.
Maybe there's a bunch of right ways, and it's not always easy to do.
Yeah.
Like, we occasionally, when we have people joining All Saints, probably about 10%, we send them back to their church to clear up some of the mess.
Yeah.
And it's not a catastrophe, but we don't want people to break their membership pledges to us here at All Saints in the process of leaving their previous congregation.
Yes.
And it's wonderful to hear of another way of that being done well.
Yeah.
So at this point, go back, and you said you married your wife's name and your kid's name?
My wife's name is Allison, and then we have 4 children together. Our oldest son is Aaron, and then we have a daughter named Harper, and then another son named Levi, and then another daughter named Phoebe. Yeah, and
Aaron
Phoebe
and Levi. I can see a pattern here. Right?
Yeah, and they both attend the Oaks here. So
that's great. Yeah. That's great. So Pastor Joel Ellis.
Yeah.
Now I've had conversations with him because, no, you tell the story. So that church is, which denomination were they in? Tell us about what they're doing and your involvement with them and how you came to leave there to come to CTK.
I mean, they have their own amazing story, and he's talked about in other places as well. But
I need to get him on here and have that story firsthand.
You should. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to meeting him. We've been in touch by.
He's a great man. They were OPC at the time. They'd been OPC since 2016. So this was around 2021 is when I came into it. So they'd been in the OPC for a while, and it definitely for how Reverend Ellis has talked about it is. It felt like coming home, finally joining the OPC. He was raised in the Churches of Christ and that kind of thing. So coming into the OPC, it felt like we were finally home. And it definitely felt that way for me as well, coming into the OPC and at that church, Reformation Orthodox Presbyterian Church, which just the name alone is scary. We had people who ended up visiting RPC over the years who lived right in the area and had driven by it, hundreds and thousands of times over the years, and always wondered, what is that?
What is that? Is it
Reformation Orthodox Presbyterian Church? Just intimidating.
Yeah,
right?
all those adjectives.
And so they we had some people who then ended up becoming members of the church and joining, and their first time walking in, they're like, what is happening in this place right now, right? And back then Joel was wearing a black robe instead of the white robe.
So, but tell us about that. What is happening? So OPC, Orthodox Presbyterian Church. Let me try and remember the history. Split from the Presbyterian Church USA, is that right?
Yes,
in the early mid 20th century,
30s.
In the 30s, Gresham Machen, Leading Light, great book, Christianity and Liberalism. If you want to go back and read something. But Orthodox Presbyterian Church is what they sought to be, Orthodox in relation to Scripture, obviously not Eastern Orthodox.
Yes.
And what they have remained, in a sense, they are a theologically conservative Presbyterian denomination, and in my mind, they have the kind of the moniker of moral and intellectual seriousness. Am I sketching the vibe? And what else would you add to it?
No, I think that's very accurate. They take their doctrine extremely seriously, like many Reformed and Presbyterian churches do. There's a tendency for us to be cerebral, even hyper cerebral to a fault, right? But they
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But they take their doctrine very seriously and are very proud subscriptionists, proud in a good way, to the Westminster standards. So that'd be the Confession of Faith and the shorter and larger catechisms.
Yeah.
But they also have their book of church order and their book of worship and things that they have as well that they subscribe to. But yes, very, very serious and intentional in their doctrinal commitments, and they see themselves very much as holding the line on orthodox, biblical, historic, Reformed Christianity and its modern expression today in America. And we have great men who have come from, I think Rush Dooney was part of the OPC for a number of years. Bonson obviously died in the OPC and did many great things. He was part of that same presbytery that I then entered into.
Is Richard Gaffin OPC minister as well?
Yes.
I think you believe.
Yeah.
And
many great men still today.
Yeah. And
John Murray from the past.
Right.
And,
And so I'll get around to having Pastor Joel Ellis on to tell the story of those guys. But you made a transition from being an associate pastor there to being the pastor at CTK in Weatherford, for which, thank God, from our point of view. But
the goal was for me to become an associate pastor. I came in as an intern because I had to transfer my credentials into the OPC, so they just brought me on as an intern in the meantime. But I was preaching regularly, or at the time we had to call it exhorting. So I went from preaching one Sunday in the same pulpit, then the next Sunday I'm now exhorting. So, but that's just how we had to do
how you handle the the paperwork.
Yeah, so I had to transfer my ordination, my credentials into the OPC. So,
so you didn't want this on record that you were preaching before you were appropriately licensed. You could get in trouble.
Yeah.
So you made a transition then from a denomination that most definitely has some significant strengths, and especially in a context like 20th century where the dominant slide is in the direction of theological liberalism and other crazy charismatic tendencies and this kind of thing.
Yes.
The OPC has been a bulwark against that, and actually you do see the fruit of that in the way in which its current landscape contrasts with some parts of other Presbyterian denominations. And I think particularly the PCA, we've got some friends in PCA churches near here, some great, wonderful churches, but that denomination is now quite broad. Yeah. And over here on the skinny branches, you've got some crazy stuff going on, and the OPC has held the line against that wonderfully. But you nonetheless left and came to CTK. So the question I'm wanting to ask now is not tell us everything that's bad about the OPC that drove you away. It doesn't sound like there was much, but as you reflect on the situation you're in now at the church in Weatherford, what has drawn you to that? Has it been theological? Has it been cultural? What things were there that meant CTK was such a and seems to have become such a wonderful home for you and a place for you to minister so fruitfully?
Yeah. So why CRC? Other than you can look at a story like mine and go, is this man just a wave being tossed with the wind, right? And we need to make sure we're not that.
Well, this is funny because you, about knowing your character, as I think I'm starting to do, you strike me as one of the least likely men I know to be blown and tossed by the wind.
I appreciate it.
Which is, as in, I want to get at some point, maybe this time, maybe another time, the views you have on scripture and translation and textual history and so on. And those views are not the views of somebody who just like will grab whatever Bible translation has just flown off the press, right?
Right.
So you don't strike me as temperamentally or theologically inclined that way. And I was trying to avoid framing it as, so you're on this journey from Southern Baptist to Reformed Baptist to OPC. Now you're at the series, because that...
It can look that way.
Right, but I mean, historically, that's what's happened.
Right.
And just before you answer the question, I mean, it happens to a lot of people, and we've had people come to us here for whom that's been their story.
Yeah.
And I just find myself saying, look, we want you to actually land the plane and bring it to a complete stop, disembark, and make your home here. Like, we don't want you flying in the door and then flying out that window in 6 months' time.
Right.
So it's completely fine if people showing up at All Saints, having been in a Church of Christ, Baptist, whatever background, and they're like, well, I'm in transition. Great.
Yeah.
We need to catch the cable across the deck of the carrier. What is it called? I forget the
Aircraft
name.
carrier?
The aircraft carrier. What's it? The cable called?
I forget the cable.
Somebody will tell me. We want you to catch the second wire, come to a complete stop, disembark, and we're settled, right?
Mm.
That, I'm assuming, is what's happened to you, and I want to hear the story of that.
Yeah, I hope so. I feel very, very much at home.
Because your wife doesn't want to move again. You've already moved to Texas from Arizona.
Right. So, I guess the best way to frame this for my particular case was, looking back now, because I've had to ask myself that question: where are we going to be next? Are you just going to go over to the Anglican Church? Are you going to be Lutheran now? Are you going to, or is this thing stopped? Right? Have we landed this thing, and we're going to begin building and putting roots down? Right? I don't want to just be jumping around. So I've had to ask myself that question honestly and pray through that and think through that. And kind of what I've come to is I go, okay, I can see a trajectory that I've been on. And so it's from the outside looking in, it might look like sporadic, now this, now that, no, the next big thing. But it's actually just been a consistent trajectory, right? It's been the logical conclusion of kind of where I was going on, going all the way back to 2010 when I'm reading Calvin for the first time, and I'm experiencing the Puritans and Spurgeon, and then I discover confessionalism, in the London Baptist Confession of Faith, and we need to go back to the Puritans, and we need to go back to the Reformers, and this kind of staunch. We need to go back. We need to go back. We need to stay there, and it was better back then, right? And there's a healthy aspect to some of that. I don't want to just talk bad about all of it. There definitely is a sense in which we need recovery. We need theological recovery, right? The Reformers themselves did that. Calvin famously says, I think it might be in the preface to his Institutes. I'm not sure. He said it somewhere. Where basically the argument is put forward, how dare you quote the church fathers? How can you be quoting Augustine, if you're leaving the church, you're not part of the church anymore? And he says, Augustinus est totus noster, right? Augustine is totally ours in the Latin. And so we want to see ourselves as part of something larger. I want my theology, my own theological convictions, and also my liturgy, all of it to be something that generations have gone before us recognize as Christian, recognize as biblical. I think that's an important thing to do. So I don't want to just, talk bad about any kind of theological recovery. I think we need theological recovery. However, going back to my story and this conviction of we need confessionalism, we need to go back to the Puritans and to the Reformers and all of this. That's what then led me to. Then I want to know what they believed about covenant. I want to know what they believed about all the things they believed on scripture, on translational issues. And so, I was kind of trying to bring myself into conformity to what the men of the past taught and thought and believed as much as I could. But part of the problem is, as we all experience, it depends on who you ask. Right. And so every tradition or every denomination or communion is going to have their own kind of take on things. And this is the Reformed view of whatever topic, right? But that's actually not how the confessions work, especially the Westminster Confession of Faith was a consensus document, right? It's these men trying to figure out, how can we say something that the majority of us can agree to, right? And sign off on. Yeah. And so part of the problem, why am I in the CREC now? One of the weaknesses, I would say, of some of the things I saw in the OPC, at least in the presbytery I was in, and there's great men in there, good gospel preaching brothers doing great work, men who have forgotten more than I will probably ever know, right? Theologically and church history, all of that. So I don't want to talk negatively of them. But, for me, what I saw in some of the hyper-confessionalism and hyper-subscriptionism and the true Reformed view of whatever topic was that they kind of treat the confession and systematic theology as kind of a wax museum, not as something that's living, that actually impacts your life, that is continuing to the Holy Spirit is continuing to lead His church and all of that. So even when they were orthodox, there's a tendency, even when you have this orthodoxy, for it to become a dead orthodoxy. Again, I'm not saying that of any particular man in that denomination or any particular man in that presbytery that I was in, but then looking at the CREC, and no doubt Joel was helpful in this as well, because he felt similarly, that looking at the CRC, we said, okay, this is all of the best things about being Reformed, I thought. Right?
Yeah.
It seems like they're imbibing, the CRC is imbibing the culture, the emphasis, the punchiness, the lifestyle of these men. Because there's a tendency in Reformed circles to just go, okay, I've got my systematic theology in line. I've got the 5 points of Calvinism. I've got the Ordo Salutis. I've got whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And know all of this stuff in your brain, but your religion is just between your ears. It's just behind your eyes. It doesn't impact the heart because we don't want to be charismatics, right? It doesn't have a whole lot to do with culture or politics because we don't want to be social justice warriors. It doesn't manifest a whole lot in your marriage and your child rearing or your personal interactions with people because we don't want to be legalists, right? So it just becomes cerebral.
Right,
It becomes, and so I think and felt at the time and still do that the CREC is on a good track for trying to take the best of that Reformed teaching on these topics and actually put flesh on it. Actually put make this thing walk and do something. Right.
One of the things that struck me, I was thinking about this conversation earlier today, and I was going to make a comment about the rate at which Presbyterian denominations split, and historically since 1789, if you look at the family tree of Presbyterian denominations, roughly once a generation, a denomination will split. If you've been a Presbyterian at any point since the late 18th century in America, you've almost certainly lived through a denominational split. And then it just dawned on me that the CREC, our denomination, did not arise out of a split. It was actually created de novo. Now that has its own problems, and it's certainly true that other churches have since joined from other denominations. And I don't think we're unique in this, but I think it does speak to one aspect of our life as a denomination that I really like, which is that at its best, the CREC is constructive. It is not defined by negative reference to what it's disagreeing with. It has a positive vision for all the things you listed, not just doctrine and fidelity to the scriptures, but because fidelity to the scriptures, therefore culture and politics and family and marriage and work and everything else. And the community life together that I've experienced in CREC churches is unlike anything else I've seen, except the church I was pastoring in London, which by God's grace had been influenced, and we owed a great debt, and the church still owes a great debt to our CREC friends with whom, if you went to visit Emmanuel in North London, you'd recognise the liturgy and you'd recognise the fellowship meals and the intentionality of building a community. So, but it's not defined as, we left those guys because they went off the rails theologically. And so we're perpetually mounting sort of theological guard dogs watching that door to make sure nobody... That's just not that's not the culture of the CREC. And I love that because it's not that we can take for granted doctrinal fidelity, far from it. We've got some fairly stringent doctrinal requirements and exams for our pastors and everything else. But I love the positive vision for the cultivation of life that we're blessed to be a part of. And tell us about that at CTK, because for some of us at All Saints, we've heard of this church. Many of us have good friends there, even family members. Obviously, we know you. I know you. But sketch your worship service and your the kind of community life, fellowship meals. Do you do those things? Do you have book groups? Do you do midweek Bible studies? That kind of thing. What's the life of the church like?
Well, that's one of the things that drew me to this. I had some options of churches I could have gone to in the OPC in Arizona as a lead pastor at the time, and I got some offers, and I candidated a few other churches in the CREC that were mission works as well. But what drew me to Church of the Triumphant King in particular was when I came out and candidated as a candidate and visited a few times, was the life, right? The culture, the community, the things they had going on, and that they were, hey, we're on target, we're doing something, right? And we're actually putting flesh and bones on what we believe, and I appreciate that. So we are still a mission work, so there's still things that are in the works, right? But we have right now a covenant renewal worship service like most CREC churches do, and people who would visit All Saints or Granbury or Weatherford are going to experience
something pretty similar.
And that's one of the beauties, I think, of covenant renewal worship and of the CREC's
and of worship more or less everywhere before 1945.
Well,
right?
Yes, right. Yes.
I mentioned this just in passing. I mentioned you've read Gregory Dix's book on the shape of the liturgy.
I don't think I have.
Well, he has this comment at the beginning that the liturgy is everywhere the same in all our sources as far back as the 2nd century. And he wrote that in 1945.
Wow.
20 years later, he could not have written that,
right?
Because of all the craziness of the 60s. But it's interesting that much of what we recognize as distinctively CREC oriented now was just like with a few changes, and there were some differences, in, like placement of different elements, but the basic shape of covenant renewal worship was just how people did stuff, because it was obvious, because it was shaped by the gospel, shaped by scriptural priorities.
Yes, right. Well, and that's one of the things that's helpful for people who are. We've been experiencing some growth at CTK as well, and I know you guys certainly have as well. So, and we have a lot of people who have never experienced anything like this, right? Even if they might be Calvinistic or whatever, this is their first time ever experiencing liturgy this way,
in a kind of intentional way.
Correct. Yeah, because and that's one of the things. Like, oh, I've never even heard this word liturgy. Well, every church has liturgy. It's unavoidable. And even a lot of Reformed, good Presbyterian churches will have liturgy, even though they would kind of poo-poo the whole idea.
Yeah, we're not a liturgical church.
Yeah, right. We're a non-liturgical church, and they have an order of worship, and you look at the order of worship, and it has all the same pieces usually, but it's sometimes
jumbled
out of order.
up.
It's like a liturgical Legos spilled out onto the page, right? But liturgy is unavoidable. But that's one of the beauties of it. It's shaped by, and that gets to the heart of kind of what drew me to the CREC and why I'm so happy to be here and excited to be here. Is again, even from our liturgy outward into everything else that we do, the Lord's Day flows into the rest of our lives, right? It's biblical. Right. It's shaped this way, not because we just said, well, this is a good idea, not just because we looked at the Anglican Book of Common Prayer and the Lutheran liturgies and all the Reformed liturgies and said, well, this is basically how they did it, and that would be true too. But it's because we see this is the biblical pattern. This is laid out not only in the Book of Leviticus, but it just theologically makes sense. God calling and cleansing and consecrating and communing and commissioning his people. This is the shape, the texture of the gospel itself that we experience as a people in our worship, as a worshiping people every single Lord's Day, and that's one of the beauties of it. So yes, we have a covenant renewal worship at CTK, and so twice a month we have Sunday school, and that's a new thing that I started doing.
Tell us about that.
So we just finished a series on Bible foundations, and that's something that we were doing at Reformation that kind of took from Joel and adapted for our needs here, but something we did every single year during the summer at Reformation. And Bible foundations is just like what it sounds like, walking people through the basics of the scriptures and how many books are there, what are the genres.
So it's like, this is an overview of what is in the Bible.
Yes, right. Yeah. So that way, and the whole goal of that is that we would make readers of the scriptures who are just as familiar, in deep into Leviticus and 2 Chronicles as they are in Romans, that you could kind of parachute into any part of the Bible and know where you are. Just like when you walk into, a movie you've seen 15 times, one of your favorite movies, you can walk in at any point and you know who the main characters are, you know what just happened, you know what's going to happen. You can probably even finish the lines, right? So,
well, and that's a great illustration, because in that situation, you also get the jokes, you feel the tension.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Because you know it's that scene, and you know what's just happened.
Yes.
You feel. Yeah. Whereas if you just drop into the middle of Malachi and you don't realize quite what's going on, it feels like, why is this guy so angry? And what have these people done wrong? And the Lord seems to end this on a bit of a sour note. And whereas if you know where you are, it's like, oh my goodness, it's like this really dramatic scene or whatever it is. Like that. So
we just finished that up, and we're gonna break for Advent.
How many weeks do you take to do that? Trying to get a sense of how detailed you go.
It was about 8 weeks.
Okay, so you got a bit of time to go through stuff.
Yeah.
Great.
Kind of, and we tried to trace had to stuff a bunch into each week, right? You know, kind of the 16 Bible time periods and kind of go through them, and you know, you can divide those up how you want as well. So, but that was helpful and good. And then in addition to our Lord's Day service, our Covenant Renewal Worship service, we have Sunday school, and then we also have a men's book study that meets once a month, a women's book study that meets once a month, a men's and sons prayer, which meets once a month. And then we also have a monthly psalm sing.
Great.
And those are all just there to, you know, you have things that are going on basically every week throughout the month, where we're getting together and building community and intentionally trying to grow in our faith together. But it also is helping to foster, and at least this is our hope, helping to foster people organically engaging with one another. And hey, you know, these two guys are going to now study this book on the side together, and we're going to have people over to our homes, and we're going to share life together and break bread together and those kinds of things. But CTK didn't need a whole lot of help on that already. That was one of the things that I was very excited about when I came, was just, you know, the hospitality and the, you know.
In a minute, I want to ask you about any particular things that you've been reading or thinking about that have particularly like excited you or concerned you, and you're feeling like, I want to share this or I need to address this. But just to give you time to think about that while I'm getting ready to ask an intervening question, I would love to hear you talk about your preferred Bible translation.
Okay.
And I didn't even mention I was going to ask you this, but I know we talked about it before, and I need to give viewers and listeners the background. So basically, before you came, or when you just arrived in Weatherford, I thought, who's this guy? I looked him up, and the first result or the second result on Google was you giving a lecture or a talk or something, and either it was a talk about the King James Version of the Bible, or it was a talk in which you read from the King James Version. And I think it might have been the former, I don't know, because I remember being struck by it, and I thought a couple of things. I thought, first, I've had conversations with King James only advocates in the past which have been disheartening. And then I thought, as I listened to you, I thought, he doesn't sound like one of those guys.
Okay. Good.
And I'd just love to, can you just sketch what your answer is to the question of what Bible translation I use and why you do that, and what your thoughts are about that? Because I have a feeling it's probably slightly different from mine, but probably quite different from what people might be expecting.
To lay my cards on the table and just tell you where we're at. Like right now, I've been for some time been preaching from the New King James at church, and that's what's in our liturgy and stuff. And it seems to be the Bible that most people have in their lap in front of me. So I, you know, at least where we're at in Weatherford, though that's changing as we grow, seems to be the New King James. So I've been using the New King James, but for my own private use, I do enjoy the King James, and I'll also preach from the King James sometimes. But when I tell people, you know, because you can get really into the weeds on this, and I think it can get really unhelpful as well. You know, some of those King James advocates, King James only guys you've met, definitely can do this, where it becomes, you know, the hobby horse.
Is there anything they'll talk about?
It's the only thing they want to talk about. And if you use any other Bible, you're using Satan's Bible. And so if people ask me, well, what Bible should I read, Pastor Dane? Well, the Bible that you're going to read. You know, if it's the ESV, if it's the, you know, there's definitely some ones that you and I both would be like, oh,
that's not really the Bible.
Right. Yeah. But, you know, your general evangelical Bible translations that are out there, the trusted, you know, NASB, ESV, whatever, if you're going to read it, you know, I don't want you to be reading your Bible every day and then you switch to the King James and go, this is too hard, and stop reading your Bible. Read the one you're going to read. Right. Yeah. So with that being said, you know, kind of just where we're at, you know, for me, it's an underlying text issue as well as a translational issue. I definitely think that the Byzantine text as well as the Masoretic text would be something that the church has historically used, and the church was kind of a steward over this text, and seems to make more sense to me to use that rather than something that's been concocted, something that's been kind of manufactured, right? And that's the amazing thing about the preservation of Scripture. Even though the modern critical text from which most of the modern Bible translations are translated today, even though that's a text that the church has never seen until this thing was made, even though that's true, the differences between the critical text and a TR or a majority text or a Byzantine text are still almost untranslatable, most of them. Yeah,
just for the sake of people who may not be familiar with textual criticism, we should clarify what you mean by manufactured or the church never seen.
Yeah.
So the most modern English translations of the New Testament translate from a Greek text, which is called an eclectic text.
Yes.
And what that means is the scholars who've assembled the text have done so by going back to all of the available manuscripts and trying to figure out, okay, which one do we think is closer to or most likely to represent the original text? So it's not that the words are made up,
right?
But everybody knows it is a patchwork created from a bunch of manuscripts, all of which we know likely have errors in them because they're copied by humans.
Yes.
But it just turns out that the errors are very small and slight, and some of them tend to be predictable, and they're not all the same errors in all the same manuscripts. So if you look at these patchwork quilt, it's like trying to figure out what a building is by looking at 5,000 different photographs of it, and each of the photographs has a few defects or pixels missing, and you just look at all the photos, you can figure out very easily what the building is, and with a bit of work you can overlay these manuscripts pictures on top of each other and sort of figure out, that pixel ought to be blue, not green, etc., etc.
Right,
so that's how an eclectic text works.
Yes, yeah.
That's the text from which that's the kind of text from which the ESV is translated, and ASB, I think, as well. The alternative is to say, we think there may be a single subset of those texts or text tradition which we ought to prioritize for historical or theological reasons. Yeah. And we should actually systematically ignore some of the data, but we ought to prioritize this because we think this has a better claim to be worthy of our attention. You want to add footnotes to that or details?
Yeah, I think that's a very helpful overview of it. And when we're talking about the Textus Receptus, which is what the King James or New King James is translated from, the text that is produced by Erasmus and Beza and worked on during the time of the Reformation. When we're talking about the Textus Receptus or the modern day majority text platform or Byzantine text platform, when we're talking about these texts, we have to also recognize those two are eclectic in one sense. It's just they're limiting the amount of data that they're right.
They're screening some and keeping a little bit.
So like the Byzantine text, which the Textus Receptus would be largely a Byzantine text platform or text, is going, okay, instead of looking at all of the manuscripts from all time everywhere, we're going to look at this stream of largely Byzantine readings. So the Greek-speaking church that's using this text and copying this text and putting it into their liturgies and their lectionaries, of which we have the most. That's where most of our Greek manuscripts come from for the New Testament, is from this Byzantine stream. Okay, we're gonna look in here, right? Yeah. And so what I meant earlier with a made-up text is exactly what you explained. I didn't say it's. I didn't mean by that it's not accurate. It's not real, somebody. These people are putting in whatever words they want,
making stuff up. Yeah.
Right. It's that if you were to pull up if you take a copy of the Textus Receptus and you then go online and pull up Byzantine manuscripts, like images of them, which you can actually do, your text is going, by and large, is going to look the same, and that's what I mean by the church. These are the texts that Christians have read for centuries. Whereas if you have a Nestle Allen 28th, or I think they're coming out the 29th soon edition in your hand, there are going to be places where this stream of text reading the way that it does and the word order that it does, no Christian has ever seen. Doesn't mean that no Christians have ever seen these readings. So
right.
But anyway, yeah.
Or rather, I think I push back slightly. I think I'll probably say we don't have any extant manuscripts which contain this wording.
Exactly.
But we think it is possible that this is what the Ephesians received.
Right.
And we think indeed that it's more likely that it's what they received.
Right.
And that's the point at which the Byzantine
advocates
will disagree, right? But it's not that we know for certain no Christian has ever seen. It's that we don't have any single manuscript that contains all these words in this order.
Right.
But that's actually true of the Byzantine, the TR as well. It's
it's just smaller.
It's smaller,
yeah.
Now, one of the things that's interesting, you get to the end of a conversation like this, and let me tell you, we're not anywhere near the end of it. We've only just started. But But you get to the end of a conversation like this, and you say, "Okay, well, hold on, where does the rubber hit the road?" And you actually get ESV and New King James. You put them side by side, and you notice two kinds of differences. You notice differences of translation, language, style, really, and then you notice that substantive, though not really substantial, differences in reading.
Yeah.
And the latter are so minimal or so infrequent that we can list them. Like literally, it's the end of Mark's Gospel. It's the Johannsson comma. It's the woman doodling, Jesus doodling in the dust. It's like a single-digit number of texts where it's like, okay, we need to talk about which ending of Mark's Gospel, and we're probably going to get to a different place.
Right.
But everywhere else where you have differences, they're so slight that, I mean, the one I always think of is like in Ephesians 2, where it's just not obvious whether it is your salvation or your faith, which is the gift of God, that none may boast. But whichever it is, we know, firstly, that both our faith and our salvation are a gift from God, that none may boast, because of other texts of Scripture. And then secondly, it doesn't make a huge difference to your reading of Ephesians 2, right? So
or Galatians 2:16, are we saved by faith in Christ or by the faith of Christ, right? And that has nothing to do with manuscripts. That's simply translational.
Right.
How are we understanding that the Greek genitive there, right? Yeah.
No, it's interesting. So the reason I mentioned this, one reason I mentioned it was because I'm just interested to hear Dane talk about it. Yeah. Another reason I wanted to let you guys listening to the podcast hear Dane talk and hear us interact over something which is a kind of a technicality that sometimes after a couple of cups of coffee or a beer or two, theologians like to geek out over.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, and most importantly, to realize the highly inconsequential nature of most of the consequences. I mean, it is consequential in the sense that you got to choose ESV or King James. You can't have both. We can't put both. I can't read one then read the other every single time I stand up in the pulpit. But once you've made your decision, it's not like we've got two different religions going down here.
Right.
So,
or two different Bibles, right?
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Well,
but some people oppose it that way. Yeah, and so on that point, this should not be something that Christians divide over. This is not a reason to leave the church. If you start coming to All Saints or to Church of the Triumphant King, and you use a different Bible translation, and you have strong convictions on that, well, okay, but
get over your strong convictions.
Right, yeah. You should not leave a church over something like this, whether they use the New King James, ESV, whatever.
If they don't use any Bible, then you might want to think again.
Right. Yeah. If there's no Bible, or they're using New World Translation, you've walked into something different. Yeah.
Final question then. Yeah. What's on your mind? So I dropped this seed earlier, so let me refresh it, and then you tell us.
Text criticism in my mind, so now I'm on.
I don't know whether you are, but are there cultural or pastoral issues that are proliferating to such an extent they're filling your horizons, and you want to share some of those with us? Is there a book or two or 8 that you're reading? It's like, this is just awesome. I can't believe Pastor Jeffrey's not read this, and I need to hear about it. What's occupying the brain space of Pastor Dane?
Yeah, right now, dealing with people that are coming into the church, into our church and into our style of liturgy and these kinds of things, who are experiencing the very thing that we are excited about being part of, right? In the CREC, the things we talked about, where it's not just what we are against, it's primarily what we are against and what we don't believe and don't practice. It's what we are doing, right? We do believe these things, therefore it impacts the way we live, and this actually flows into every aspect of your life, even the smallest aspects, right? But marriage and child rearing and the roles of men and women biblically and how this matters and why this matters. That's something that as a pastor we're always having to deal with if you're actually shepherding people and doing what you're called to do. Shepherd the people of God is teach them these things and help them walk through these things. And for some people, this is they've been a Christian 20 years, and this is the first time they're being confronted with these ideas. And they've been right in front of them in the text all along, but they've never had somebody sit down and put them this way to them. They've never seen how this looks, right? They're seeing the Bible make sense to them for the first time, and those kinds of things.
That's great.
So I don't know if you have the same habit or a similar habit or not, but I have a list of books that I reread every single year. And so I just finished, usually in November, it ends up being in November for some reason, I read through Murray's Redemption, Accomplished, and Applied. It's just so crisp and clear and helpful to, and there's places we might have whatever, but he's Murray, right? He's great. So I just finished reading that last night. And then in December, the book I read every December is Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. So I don't know if I'm sure you've read that book.
Yeah, I've read both.
But Chesterton is phenomenal. That's another shout out to Pastor Joel Ellis who got me on that, because he was like, if you want to understand why I'm weird and why I am the way I am, read Chesterton on Orthodoxy. And I was like, cool. So that book has been helpful to me over the past few years, and I look forward to it it's like a Christmas present every year. I get to read Orthodoxy.
It's funny. I don't have that habit as systematically.
Okay.
But there are definitely books I come back to. Yeah. And there's a bunch of theological books. There are a bunch of other books which are not theological in nature, and but nonetheless have been are within their domain seminal and very significant, and which by God's grace I found helpful. And I started rereading last night The Distracted Mind by what's the guy's name? Gazzaley, and Adam Gazzaley and somebody Rosen. This was back in 2007, 2008. It was in the early days. No, it must have been later than that. But it was the first book in the era of smartphones and social media to really systematically and in a somewhat scholarly way put together the pieces from neuroscience and psychology about what these devices are doing to the insides of our heads. It's MIT Press. It's kind of like halfway between popular and scholarly, and I think it is worth the price of admission, because it's basically got the guts of dozens of much more ephemeral and fluffy and less substantial spin-offs all contained within it. There's 3 or 4 books that I think in that whole domain like that. Flow by Csikszentmihalyi, Distracted Mind, a couple of others that I find they provoke me to renew my defenses against, in this case, distraction or whatever. So I'm with you in this the spirit of rereading good things. Yeah,
because that comes right up against our form of liturgical worship, the distraction, the entertainment, and everything. That's part of the thing people have to get used to. They have to kind of catch the beauty of Reformed liturgy.
Well, I talked about the shape of our worship service just a couple of weeks ago in a sermon, basically. This is why we do the things we do, the way we do it. And in January, Lord willing, I'll preach on the flip side of that, how we should be involved as congregants, as worshippers.
We're not spectators.
Right. Exactly. I made the comment, which I've made before, which I, Lord willing, will expand in January, that we should leave a worship service emotionally and perhaps physically drained and exhausted. It should be a highly demanding experience. We had Andrew Seiss preaching for us just yesterday. Really demanding sermon. I mean, it was just a lot of content, 40 some minutes in the second service. Really, really great sermon. But you couldn't watch it like you watch an episode of Friends or whatever people watch on TV anymore. I'm probably dating myself. I don't have a TV. I don't watch TV. I watch occasionally DVDs. Anyway, I digress. But you can't just like soak it up in the background, because you would just find it very, very impenetrable. You had to be in the zone, switched on, paying attention, and then there was just gold there. Yeah. And the same with our worship service. You want to it's not a TED talk with a rock concert. It's something for you to do, and to bring yourself to, and
correct. Yeah. And we are one body, and that's one of the beauties of it. There's times, I'm sure you guys have times where you raise hands and all of that, but it's not raise your non-denom, charismatic churches, people are used to, as I feel led, I do the different, the different, how big is your TV? How big was the fish? Big screen TV, all that kind of stuff. But you do it as you feel like it. If I feel like I'm having some sort of emotional connection to Jesus,
then I can express it.
I choose to express it when I choose to express it, physically how I choose to express it, right? Whereas in covenant reformed or covenant renewal liturgy, it is we do this as one body, and that teaches us obedience in our life. Physical obedience. We're not, going back to the cerebral thing, and we can be too cerebral in reformed circles. It's not just about doctrine. It's about obedience, right? The obedience of the faith, as Paul talks about, and the bookends of Romans, right? Is the obedience of the faith, covenant renewal worship teaches us how to do this. It's not, well, I've been a really bad Christian this week, or I feel that I've been a bad Christian this week, so I'm not going to raise my hands. I don't
really
feel
fit
like
in the
it.
zone.
Right. No, we're all raising our hands right now because it's the doxology or the Gloria Patri or the Sanctus, and so this is what we're doing. We are going to, as one body, physically with our bodies, obey Jesus Christ and offer Him worship. Well, if that becomes a pattern in your liturgical worship at church, that's going to flow into the rest of the things you do in your life. It becomes automatic that I physically obey Christ. We're being trained by the liturgy. I think this is not original to me. I think Jeff Myers makes this point in his Big Fat book on
liturgy is training for life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the obvious point about the only time that most people kneel, unless they kneel to pray customarily, is when we kneel to pray in worship, and perhaps you kneel to propose to your wife, but presumably you don't have to keep doing that all the time. There's something about that distinctive posture that trains us in the discomfort and the lowliness and the marked self-humbling of coming before the living God. And that's supposed to be really, really disjunctive and unnerving and resonate internally with us.
And it does, and I think that's why could be some opposition to it.
Right,
exactly. I just preached on this.
If it was anodyne, then it wouldn't do anything.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I just preached on this from Ephesians. We're going through the book of Ephesians during ordinary time. We're breaking for Advent, but I preached on this in Ephesians 3:14 just a few weeks back. I bow my knees before the Father. Why does Paul say that? We just kind of skim over it. And I use that as kind of a jumping off point to spend a whole sermon talking about posture and prayer, because for a lot of people this is still a new thing. The Bible talks about what your physical body should be doing when you pray, or that there even is something you should be doing. And it's like, well, actually it talks about all these different ways that we pray. We don't actually think about it very often, but it's right there in the Bible, and we read it all the time.
Right.
So
what do you think of the fact that, so I had to look this up just to check, and at some point we'll end the podcast and let everyone go, but we need to just carry on talking. I checked, the Bible records people lying down, face down before God, having been confronted by Him, more frequently than it records us kneeling. And quite a lot of the time where the text will say kneel, as in English it will say kneel, the Greek or Hebrew will say bow, and it's not always bow the knee. When it says bow the knee, obviously that means kneel, but when it says bow, it's a different gesture. But face down, Ezekiel, a few other times.
Yes.
My reading of that is that our kneeling in worship is a valid liturgical approximation to that, just as a small piece of bread and a taste of wine are a legitimate liturgical approximation to a meal. And liturgy is by its nature stylized as well as representative. So I don't think, I'm not campaigning for a liturgical revolution where we all lie prostrate at the confession of sins, because I think kneeling does the job.
Instead of kneelers, we need layers. Right. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. You need a kind of a blanket to lie down. I don't know what you do. What do you think? Is that right?
No, I think that's exactly right. Yeah. And when I preached the sermon, I actually went through all those different postures, and I didn't go through the Greek and Hebrew of each term in every case, but I did laying prostrate before God, and there's a distinction between that and bowing. I thought I also noticed that oftentimes kneeling happened corporately, or specifically kneel. Thinking of the dedication of the temple.
Yes.
It's not just Solomon that kneels; it's the whole
people.
So I don't know if you looked at that word. If it's is it bow?
I think that's bow the knee.
Okay.
Which means kneel. And what's important there is that tells us that the point I was hinting at before, or articulating before, that it is a stylized representation of prostrate, face down,
which usually happens privately.
Exactly. So when Ezekiel is confronted by the vision in Ezekiel chapter 1, he falls face down and he hears the voice of one speaking.
Yes.
But when you've got thousands of people assembled in 1 Kings 8, the dedication of the temple, well, it's a little impractical, but it's totally appropriate to take what is represented by the gesture of self-abnegation in lying prostrate in the dust before the Lord and turn it into a kind of microcosm of face down, which is kneeling, and so the fact that Solomon and the people do it is a kind of liturgical warrant for our adopting it in that way.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I want to know what to do about. I made a comment about people's liturgical intuitions sometimes take hold. So we have hands raised like this in praise, doxology, gloria.
Yeah.
Pastors, hands raised like this towards the people, number 6, Leviticus 9.
Yes.
But we also have a small number of people who hold their hands out like this to receive what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I don't want to either. Part of me wants to say don't do that because of the corporate point that you made.
Mm.
But part of me wants to say, no, actually, I don't want to become the tyrant who insists on absolute conformity in every gesture and sub-gesture.
Yeah.
And if this isn't becoming an issue, that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. You get to a certain point where what's happened is a tradition has developed that hasn't got much reference to biblical. There's not really a biblical version of this. Hands outstretched, palms up, like this to receive from the Lord. I don't know.
Right.
So I'm not sure what we do with that.
At Reformation, we did that, but it wasn't tyrannically.
Was it something that you encouraged the whole congregation to do?
But it was something that was kind of when we're teaching when Pastor Joel was teaching through this, he said he talked about the different points, and that was something that new members were talked about. Some people didn't do it. A lot of people didn't do it.
Because we have more or less 100.
We still have people whose their arms they ain't coming up no matter what you do. So,
well, we only would have a small number of people who wouldn't raise their hands during the doxology, and I think the reason for that is like they're visitors. This is a bit weird. And I totally sympathise. And I don't want to apologise for the weirdness, but I want to totally sympathise and say, that's okay. And thank you for coming and not storming out at the strangeness that you're perceiving. But I do want to say for a congregation, no, this is absolutely like you're saying. Let us do this together as a corporate gesture of mutual submission and submission to the Lord in reflecting with our bodies what we're saying with our lips and believing in our hearts.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, as you can tell, we could talk all day. What time is it? Oh, my goodness. I said somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes, and I think we've gone an hour and a quarter.
All right.
So I've taken up...
We've got to call it at some point.
Your congregation might legitimately require you to return to your desk and begin your duties there this afternoon. Yeah. And my congregation will certainly require the same.
Yes.
Thank you, brother, for coming. And
thank you, brother. Yeah.
It's wonderful to have you, if not in town, in the adjacent town. And for many years, may our fellowship and co-labouring continue. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
God bless, guys. Bye for now.